terms, when people think of historians, they think of grey hair and rather serious demeanors and very stern people. Think also of how you can visualize the world. There is the world as it is, but then there is the world as it can be. So I would just say keep reading, read widely, keep your mind open, and you will find that these tricks won't work on you.
Today, we have with us a young, passionate author, storyteller, and historian who is known for his exceptional eye for hidden historical detail, along with an inclination towards revealing the often unknown and undiscovered anecdotes from history. So why wait? Let's hear from our speaker of the day, Mr. Manu S Pillai.
While I was being introduced, I couldn't help but notice the irony of being called a young historian in a room where the average age is, 15? But such is, in relative terms, when people think of historians, they think of grey hair and rather serious demeanors and very stern people. I can assure you I'm not very stern, but I am serious in my work. One boy, he was born in Africa, in Ethiopia. His name was Chapu, and he was born there somewhere in the mid-1500s, so around 1550 or so. At around the age of 12, Chapu is abducted. He's kidnapped by a bunch of slave traders. And from Ethiopia, he's taken by ship, and he's sold to a slaver. The slaver sells him to somebody in Baghdad, and he works there and stays there for a while. His name is changed. He becomes Ambar. He converts to Islam, and that's how he's living there. At a certain point, Ambar is again sold. He's put on a ship and brought to India. He ends up somewhere near Goa, lands on the coast, and he becomes a slave to the Peshwa, or the Prime Minister of the Sultan of Ahmednagar. He was brought in as a fighter. And over the next few decades, he fights, he works for various sultans, and he slowly has a loyal following, about 300 odd people or horsemen working with him. They're all fighters. You can hire them for battle, and they'll come and serve you. Now, in the 1590s, where he's in his 40s, Emperor Akbar, the great Mughal emperor, decides that he wants to start conquering South India. So this army of the Mughals starts descending into South India. The kingdom of Ahmednagar collapses, and there's absolute chaos. And guess who comes to the rescue of this collapsing state? It is this man called Ambar with his 350 odd people. He proves himself to be a capable leader. He proves himself to be a good fighter. And soon he's got 700 people working for him. After a while, it becomes 3,000. Then it becomes 10,000. And by the 1610s, he's got about 50,000 people fighting for him. It is this African man born in Ethiopia, enslaved and sold in India, who becomes the wall between the Mughals in the north and the conquest of South India. That he commissioned a painting in which he's shown releasing an arrow at the impaled, cut-off head of Malik Ambar, as this Ambar was known by then. Except that he never actually achieved this in real life. Ambar died in his 80s, very comfortable in his fortress in the Deccan. He suffered only one major defeat. Otherwise, he regularly defeated the Mughals, prevented them from coming into South India for 25 years. Fascinated me, the idea that there was a black man from Africa fighting for Indians in the early 17th century. He got his daughter married to the Sultan of Ahmednagar, so there was a black woman who was a queen in Ahmednagar in the 17th century. How many of us can visualize an African person ruling in India? It's a bizarre story almost. And the greatest sort of drama in this is that among his close comrades was a man called Maloji Bhosle. Maloji Bhosle fought with Malik Ambar. After a while, he had a son called Shahaji, who also fought for Malik Ambar. And afterwards, Shahaji had a son whose name was Shivaji. And Chhatrapati Shivaji, who then fought the Mughals later in the 17th century, originally was following the footsteps of Malik Ambar. And we know this because Shivaji, in his own court poem, the Shiva Bharata, pays tribute to Malik Ambar. He says, this is a man as brave as the sun. This is a man who was like the god Kartikeya fighting the Asuras. Another interesting character was a lady, more recent to us in time, 18th century, 19th century, called Begum Samru. Begum Samru was born in around 1850s again. She was originally a dancing girl. That is, in some place in Delhi, in Chandni Chowk, she used to work in what was, to put it crudely, a brothel. At some point, she fell in love with, or rather, This man fell in love with her. It was a European mercenary who used to wander around India training troops for Indian rulers and so on. And he had about 3,000 odd soldiers with him. He falls in love with her and she leaves the dancing house and she becomes his partner. In the 1870s, when she's still a young woman, he dies. And what does she do? She kicks out his son, who's considered useless, and she takes over the army. So from a dancing girl in Chandni Chowk, she now becomes the leader of an army, turned warrior princess who goes to the rescue of the Mughal emperor in Delhi, Emperor Shah Alam, and saves him from crisis, saves him from being besieged in his own capital. He gives her royal titles. She's made the princess of Sardana. In the middle of this, she converts to Christianity because she thinks that is good to position herself. She comes to an alliance with the East India Company, and by the 1830s, she's one of the richest women in India. She's one of the most prominent figures in North India. She's built one of the greatest churches in North India in Sardana. But again, look at where she began, as a dancing girl in a brothel. These two stories are just to tell you that if you look through Indian history, there are all these fascinating characters who began in places that were considered low. Malik Ambar in Ethiopia, he didn't even know India existed, and this Begum Samru as a dancing girl in Chandni Chowk of Kashmiri descent, who also had no idea where her life was going to lead. But both of them ended life as heroes because it doesn't matter where you begin, they were just determined. They had a certain tenacity that took them through life and they became these prominent historical figures. Think also of how you can visualize the world. There is the world as it is, but then there is the world as it can be. It's not really about the kings and queens. It's not really about the battles, though battles are interesting. It's about the human beings. And it's about human beings who stood up, said what needed to be said, even if it was not popular, dared to dream big, dared to dream of a better world. And I think that is the message that perhaps you should take back from this talk. The conference here is called Transforming India, but perhaps the first step to transforming India is to transform yourselves and transform the way you look at the world. And if you do that, then the country will also be transformed.
So in our NCERT textbooks, a lot of important portions or elements are deleted. So what are your thoughts about that?
That's something that keeps happening, frankly, because ultimately who writes textbooks? It's governments. And governments are formed by parties. Parties have ideologies. All parties do that. Depending on where you're in the country, which state, which party is in power, textbooks keep getting revised. So the answer to that ultimately is not to keep relying on the textbook, it's to read more broadly. And if you're not interested in reading, listen. There's audiobooks, there's so many options, there are podcasts. Just keep engaging with the world, and all these tricks that people play with textbooks won't apply to you because you're already better informed. It's when we are solely reliant on textbooks that this becomes a problem. Yes, nobody should be doing this. Ideally, we should be committed to the truth, not to an ideology. But we also live in the real world, and in the real world, things are imperfect. So I would just say keep reading, read widely, collect as much information as you can, keep your mind open, and you will find that these tricks won't work on you.
From your talk, you told that ancient times women were given a lot of, the respect.
In Kerala.
Yes, comparatively. But now we are talking about women empowerment. So what made this transformation? Like, what was missed in between?
Sorry?
Now we are talking about women empowerment. On those days, women were given respect. But now there is a lag. So what was that happened in between?
So it's not just a question of giving respect, because giving respect already suggests that one person has it in their hand and they have to give it to somebody else. That dynamic is already unequal. One person has it, the other is unequal, and you're trying to give them. Women's empowerment is about women commanding respect. It's very different from giving respect. It's about making the world fair in a way that men and women, boys and girls have the same opportunities. Now, even now, it's the sad truth in our country. All the boys here, they can walk out at 9 o'clock on the street at night without a thought about their safety. But that's not the same for girls. They can be bold, they can be strong, and they're not scared. But all the same, somewhere at the back of their minds, or at least the minds of their parents, it'll be like, it's dark, you better be careful. That pressure itself sits more on women than it does on boys. Look at our news reports. Anytime you have cases of violence against women and all that, it says, woman violated. No, it was a boy's problem. The headline should be saying that this guy did something wrong, not focusing on what happened to the woman, right? Because that again reinforces the idea that somehow the woman has to be more careful. So women empowerment is about creating an infrastructure for the world that is fairer and equal for everybody irrespective of gender. That is what even feminism is about. People think feminism is about fighting for women's rights and like women changing the world and preferring women. No, it's about making the infrastructure of the world equal. So at 9 o'clock, boys and girls can both go out equally without having to fear.